Welcome to Midlife Schmidlife, the online community for listeners who want to redefine the middle years and recreate their lives lived to the fullest. Join our host, Liz Applegate, as she interviews guests over the age of 40 who are turning their maybe somedays into today and going after their dreams. Let's get the party started.
Hey there, Schmidlifer. I am so glad that you are here, and happy August. I cannot believe it, but yes, when I am recording this, this is the very first day of August 2017. I have no idea where this year has gone, but it doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon. Before we get started with today's interview, which I know that you're just going to love, I want to invite you to head over to iTunes and click subscribe to the podcast. You see, the more subscribers that the podcast has, the higher the show will show up when someone is searching for something like Midlife Schmidlife. I mean, on the show, we talk about redefining midlife. We talk about empty nest. We talk about all kinds of things that women over the age of 40 are dealing with. We talk about menopause. There's a lot of good stuff here. And we also talk about turning your maybe some days into today. So the more subscribers that we have on the podcast, then actually it enables us to share the message with other women just like you. So if you head on over to midlifeschmidlife.com/iTunes, you'll be taken to iTunes. You can click on through, sign onto your account, and subscribe that way. Or if you are on your iPhone right now, be sure and click the podcast icon, which is it's like a little purple guy, and you can click that. You can search for the show, and then you can hit subscribe. And this is great for on-the-go listening. Every time a new podcast episode is released, it gets downloaded. You can listen to it when you're working out, or when you're working on your creative projects, or when you are driving to work. Wherever you are, it is with you, and you get to listen and be one of the first to listen to the episode. So let's just get into today's show, because I'm really excited to share this guest with you. So I have to tell you that I love when I get recommendations for guests from my own friends. And I just know that they know me. They just kind of know who I am. They know I'm kind of quirky. They know what the show's about. And so when my friend Lara Heacock of Kind Over Matter, she is a leadership coach and a very good friend of mine, when she introduced me to get today's guest, I just knew immediately that Tracie Nichols and I would have a wonderful conversation. Tracie is a nature-loving poet, mother of 3 children, something we have in common. She's an amateur photographer, a speaker, facilitator, a career and leadership coach. She has had an incredibly eclectic career path, something else I understand, with a deep curiosity about and love of people of all kinds, with a deep commitment to nurturing a quiet revolution toward compassion, equality, and inclusion. She holds a master's degree, and I love how she puts this. She says she holds a master's degree with a ridiculously long name, Master's in Transformative Learning and Change, with an emphasis in human and organizational transformation. Yeah, that is a long name, but boy, does that sound interesting. Tracie also says that she is multi-potentialed, which is another way of saying multi-passionate, which is something else we talk about on the podcast. She's introverted and identifies as a highly sensitive person or an HSP. So this may be something new to you if you've never heard of the term HSP. And I can identify with being an HSP, and I do go into this a little bit in the podcast, but basically, you may be an HSP and not even realize it. If you find yourself being kind of overwhelmed by the emotions of the evening news, or you can feel the energy of other people, you can be empathic, so those are some of the qualities that I have. And then also, like me, and I do get into this in the conversation that we have, I can actually hear the buzz of neon lights. And yeah, it's been one of those things that I just kind of get used to. But if any of these things ring true to you, you may actually be an HSP as well. But even if you can't relate to these qualities, this interview is just wonderful to talk about and speak into living your giftedness as being truly you and who you are. Tracie shares her story on how she supports people like herself who are multi-potentialed, and she helps them find a career that they love and align with who they are. So during this interview, we have many laughs and we share many stories between us, and I just know that you are going to love it. To find the show notes for this show, you can head on over to midlifeschmidlife.com/23, and that's the number 23. So I will have all the links in the show notes. Tracie and I talk about a couple books. We talk about an online test that you can take to see if you are an HSP. And of course, I will have a link there so that you can connect with Tracie as well. So I really hope that you'll enjoy this show. And I just would love to hear from you as well. So be sure and head on over to the show notes. Like I said, midlifeschmidlife.com/23. Leave your comments, or also you can find me on Facebook at Midlife Schmidlife with Liz Applegate, or you can also look for my coaching Facebook page, which is actually Liz Applegate. I'm in the process of combining all this to make it easier to get in touch with me, but both of those work right now, so take advantage of that. So let's head on over to the interview with Tracie Nichols. Hi, Tracie. Welcome to Midlife Schmidlife.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to have you on today's show. And before we get started, I am asking all my guests, how old are you and what do you love about being this age?
I am 55 years old. And when I read that you were going to ask this question, I kind of went, yay!
I love it.
It's so, I've walked this planet for 55 years in joy and in grief and in sorrow and in boredom and anxiety and, the full range of human experience. And I'm here 55 years later and, hopefully more to go, but wow.
Wow.
I'm here and I feel alive and engaged and as if there's lots of potential. So I don't know, to me, being 55 is all about kind of celebrating what I've lived through and what I've experienced and, taking a moment to breathe into what's happening in my life now and then anticipating a bit what's coming next.
Oh my gosh, that is such an amazing answer, Tracie. Thank you so much. Oh, I love it. So I have to ask you, just out of curiosity, did you always feel this way? I mean, because I had a really hard time turning 50. And so I'm wondering, did you always come at your age with this enthusiasm, or was it more of a learned thing for you?
Interesting. I think I had, so, in fairness, I tend to be an optimist. So, so there's always that underpinning my responses to life. But at the same time, for me, the weird age, and I did have one, was when I hit 35. And 35 was this tipping point, and all of a sudden I was like, oh no, I'm not young anymore. Like it really rattled me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my optimism slipped, for a year or two there. And I really needed to I think just orient back into life. And I also at that time was having a second child and then a third child. And so, overall I had
Right.
sleep deprivation and all of the
Yes.
things along with small children. So that probably played in a little bit to the slip in optimism, because I just didn't have the energy to be optimistic. But there was definitely a sense of differentness. There's something very different about my life and a sense that, I lost that kind of omniscience of I'll be here forever.
Mm-hmm.
And started to become aware that, that time here in this life is limited, and, and there's stuff I want to do. So.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how, people at different ages, things hit them differently. I had like turning 40 was not a big deal to me. Turning 41 hit me for some reason. And then turning 50, I think, was just, wow. And I had so many back reasons why, like I was older than my father ever was. And I think that was a big reality. But mortality really hit me at, like you said, like I wasn't young anymore. And knowing just that our time was limited, and okay, have I really been living my life with the intention that I want it to be up to this point? And how am I going to make the choice now to do that? So,
and I think I've certainly been in more of that mindset in the past 2 years. And it's triggered by the fact that my youngest child this past September went to college. So I have 2 kids in college, one who's grown and out of the house, and so looking at the the empty nest idea and having more space in my life, because now it's not focused around driving them everywhere or what's their schedule, and I could refocus on myself. And so I think that prompted certainly the space and time, but also the inclination to do, as you said, look at, what are the choices I'm making? Am I living the way that I would choose to be? And I certainly came, sort of to the abrupt decision that I wasn't necessarily back in December of 2015, and and sort of called a full stop to my career. I had a practice mentoring women, and finished with them and stopped, and took a year to breathe into who I was and to try and figure out what felt off, what felt on, and where I wanted to go with things.
Right. Yes, there is definitely something about when the kids are out. I'm in the same position. I have 2 kids in college, and my oldest is out of college and out on his own, and there is just that reality of, okay, what do I want my life to look like now? It's our roles kind of shift for ourselves even.
You do, indeed.
Yeah. So you gave me a perfect segue into sharing what you do when you shared that you took some time off to kind of recenter and see which way you wanted to go with your business. So in the introduction, I already introduced you as a person who is very multi-passionate, which you are my people. Like oh my gosh, we could just go on and on about the different roles we've had and the different interests we have, and the constant changing in that. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, and just share a little bit your process, what you went through, and just I would love to hear that story.
Well, thank you. And I'll try and encapsulate, what happened was I have, in 2008, I'd opened my own private practice. And at that time, I was a massage therapist and an aromatherapist. And I practiced energy therapies. And then I moved into doing coaching. And then I moved into working with women who were surviving some kind of violence or trauma from the perspective of resiliency practices. And that was where I was when, we reached sort of the end of 2015, and I loved my clients, and what I was doing felt like important work, but I was no longer engaged in it. And you cannot sit with someone who is, disclosing something that painful and pivotal in their life and not be fully present. And the moment I realized that had happened with a client, I realized that I needed to stop. And in looking at things, I was teaching resiliency practices, and I realized we don't always practice what we preach, but I was. And so I had good self-care in place, and there weren't many crises going on in my life. Nothing more than usual, just
right.
usual stuff, but there was nothing major. All of the usual things that would cause, burnout or a need to, distraction in work, those were not happening. And so I needed to figure out what was causing this work that I had loved so much to suddenly not engage me any longer. And I knew that I could not continue to, to work with women who were in such a beautiful and yet fragile state without being fully present for them. Mm-hmm. So I finished with my clients and closed my practice, and it just sort of coincided with pretty much the end of 2015. Mm-hmm. And sent out a thank you and farewell newsletter to my newsletter list, which had been going for 7 years at that point. Right. And job at the local library part-time, so we didn't financially go down the drain, and gave myself breathing time. And I went around sort of, and at that point I started spinning around in my own head about, what's wrong with me and why can't I stick with things, and many of the questions that clients are now coming to me with, why can I not find the thing and do it forever? Why am I so sensitive, to how an office feels, or why can I not sit in a room has no windows and, has fluorescent lights buzzing all day? And when I was looking at those questions, I was vaguely aware of what is called a Renaissance soul or a scanner, multipotentialite, and I was also aware that there are people who are highly sensitive people. But in true multipotential style, I kind of learned those things, and I learned them, I integrated them, and I moved on. I didn't necessarily apply them to my own life. So I went to a career counselor, mm-hmm. and she, bless her, asked, she took care of my immediate anxiety by saying, of course I'll rewrite your resume with you.
Right.
Nothing to do with what I really needed to have done.
Right.
And then asked me some very, very beautiful pointed questions, and then had the sense to let me go off. And again, this is a multi-potential thing where you need to go off and research and integrate your own, kind of on your own, and I went and I did that and rediscovered all the information about being highly sensitive and being multipotential and being an introvert. So when I found all of that and it came together, it gave me the opportunity to take a new picture of myself and my life, and to be able to look at, my career history, which is, it looks like it belongs to 6 different people. And at least 6. I'm probably being generous there. And see it in a different light, and understand that there are values and, deep passions that underpin everything that I've done. And it may not look to the outside world like it all fits together, but it does. To be able to see that I had a body of work that was important, and that I had touched people's lives, and that I had made a difference, and that I could continue to, and that that needing to change what I was doing every 2 to 3 years didn't mean that I was flaky, or I was unreliable, yes. Or that I couldn't stick with something. It meant that's how I'm wired. And I never leave something behind. It's always integrated into what I'm doing next. And so it just allowed me to see myself so differently, and to then realize that there are people like me. I mean, when you look at the research, for people who are highly sensitive, and that means their nervous system is quite literally being impacted by the world more deeply than the rest of the world. So Great example. A friend of mine, she said she drives her husband crazy because she walks in the house and she's like, "What's that smell?" And she does it almost all the time. And he's like, "What smell? There is no smell. Why is there always a smell?" And for her, there is. There's something there. She's sensing, and other people aren't necessarily sensing it. So it's, when that's the way your nervous system interacts with the world, it can make the rest of the world react to you like, "Oh, you're too sensitive, you're too much, you're overreacting," and that can be such a difficult thing to cope with in the workspace, or even if you're self-employed. And then when I looked at people who were multi-potentialed and looked at how often they're underemployed, and because they'll start over again rather than realizing they have a body of work to draw on, they have transferable skills that are really, really juicy, and that the way that they interact with information, the fact that they can see in this holistic, integrated way is so important, especially now in the business world, that they constantly are going for entry-level jobs and they're underemployed and they're bored and it's not great. And they're constantly having to explain their resume because, it doesn't look like they have a consistent work history often. So I realized that there is just this huge need, and I have a lot of contacts who are counselors, and they were all like, "Yes,
right.
Yes, people need this." So, so it's just as organic moving into a sense of this. There's a need, and I have this master's degree that plays right into it. This degree in education and human development, and in organizational development, and then I got a certification in career development facilitation, which gave me additional tools and information about what's available to people who are trying to make career transitions. And I launched myself onto the next iteration of my career. So, goodness, that was a long answer.
No, I loved it. I totally loved it. I did. And actually, I was like fist pumping just because it's just, I don't know. It's having lived that life of both being so we were laughing before we started this interview about how there's so many different descriptions for people who are have multi-passions. So there's multi-passionates, there's Renaissance souls, multi-potentialites, scanners. I mean, there's like all these different labels. And so we were kind of laughing, you and I were laughing about that. But and it's just so, and also as I don't know, I've taken the HSP test, and what's funny is there are some questions that I am a resounding yes and could score really high, and some I'm just kind of but I can definitely relate, there are like I can sense people's moods before they even speak to me. I can feel, it's almost like a vibration I can feel. It sounds very strange, but
it makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, you get it. You said something about fluorescent lights, like I can hear them buzz.
Yes,
like I can,
me too.
Yes. So
all my life.
Yeah. And it's like it gives me, it overwhelms me to the point where I have to get out of my office. I have to go, so it's just all these things but what I was thinking of when you were explaining all this, actually, so this is a typical, multi-potentialite conversation because I'm going all over the place. But so what I realized too is when you were describing, I'm not flaky, I'm not, all these things that we've been told our whole lives, whether it's we're too sensitive, we just need to get over it, we're too quiet, we're too standoffish, and I'm just pulling from what I've been told. And then it would go the opposite for me, like, well, now you're too loud, and now you're too, it's just kind of like, oh, good grief, I can never be, just
right.
Or it's just kind of like, or I was taking a class on learning web design and at one point, and then I went to do something else, and then I got negative feedback from my family. Well, I thought you were going to be a web designer. Well, no, right. I just wanted to learn the mechanics of it so that I could work on my own website, right? So,
right.
Yeah, and it's just, I just think of all the negative feedback we have received from the world.
It can be very hard.
Yes.
And one of the Margaret Lobenstein, who's the woman who wrote the book called The Renaissance Soul, she likened it to when you look through history, people who are multi-potentialed were actually considered, the rising people, the ones who were the most desired in culture up until you hit about the Industrial Revolution. And then what happened was you wanted people who could be specialists because, when you had a factory, you wanted someone who could stand there and, and work a sewing machine or wind a bobbin or, cut leather for saddles or whatever the process was. You needed people who were okay with specializing in one thing and who could keep their attention focused on it for a great period of time, which is not necessarily a strength of people who are multi-potentialed. So you had this shift in the culture where then specialists became what was desired, and people who were multi-potentialed were then viewed as the whole thing turned on its head. So the messaging came back from, the culture we live in, that you were somehow wrong if you couldn't, decide what you wanted to do for the rest of your life when you were coming out of high school and going to college or going into an industry. And, here's the thing I'm going to do for the next 50 years.
Right. Which sounds like hell to me.
To me too.
Yeah. No,
some of the classic questions when you're doing in traditional career development, some of the classic questions are, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years, to help people, narrow down what they, what kind of career choices they want to make. Well, for people like you and me, that's awful. I'm like, 5 years? What are you kidding? I can maybe tell you what I want to do for the next 9 months. Can we work with that?
Right. Yeah.
So, and one thing that's so important to remember is, with highly sensitive people, you're talking about 15 to 20% of the population. So that means that there's 80 to 85% of the population who don't experience the world, the way that highly sensitive people do. And so there is a disconnect. There is, a sense it's hard for us to get how they don't smell that smell or hear that, fluorescent light.
Right.
But it's also really difficult for them to get why we do. So I think there's simply a need for education and communication and, sort of normalizing everybody's experience. Neither experience is, better or worse. It's just simply what it is. And with Renaissance souls or multi-potential people, there's about 10% of the population that they know of. There's less research done on that particular area, or at least that I've been able to find. So, again, you have a lot of the world who isn't interacting with information and with life in the same way that multi-potential people are. So I think in some senses, a lot of this becomes about talking about it and normalizing it so that people who are multi-potentialed or highly sensitive get that they're totally okay and that there are gifts and challenges with how they are, just like there are gifts and challenges with being someone who is, not multi-potentialed or who isn't highly sensitive.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's definitely more of a movement toward that. I mean, you mentioned this book, Renaissance Soul, and I know that there's one, I know Barbara Scher, I think she's another author.
Yep, Refuse to Choose is one of hers.
Yes, that's another one. So there are several, and I feel like it's becoming, and then you've got Putty Like with Emily Wapnick.
Emily Wapnick.
Yeah, so I feel like it's becoming more and more, it's just starting to break the surface. It reminds me of when becoming, realizing it's kind of like owning being an introvert. I think there's been this real ownership of being introverted, and people, people are like, yeah, I'm introverted, and I'm fine with that. And
exactly, and it's not a detriment to me in my career or in my life.
Right, and it is about kind of dispelling the myths between all of that. What that means.
Absolutely. I think that's, yes, I think dispelling the myths and creating a sense that everybody in however they interact with the world is simply living who they are. One of the people I was presenting with last week we were doing a workshop for highly sensitive people and discussing the concept of leadership and being highly sensitive. And she brought up this really interesting point. She said, while 15 to 20% of the people in the world are gifted with high sensitivity, that's no different than, the percentage of people in the world who are gifted with musical abilities, or who are gifted as programmers, or who are, gifted as artists, or gifted as farmers. There are people, in every category, and there's a certain percentage of them. So if you actually went and kind of broke down, the population of the world into areas of giftedness, you would find, that we're this beautiful sort of faceted gem of multi-giftedness, and each person living their own gifts contributes to, to the whole, and there isn't a better or worse. But there is a need to understand that, my giftedness is as important as, someone else's giftedness, and to be able to live my giftedness without feeling ashamed of it or needing to hide who I am because for some reason right now in our culture, it's not the thing.
Wow. Gosh, I just really love that. I love, especially since when you're talking about being a musician or something, those are gifts that we look at and we admire. And so I think being able to look at the gifts of being an HSP or a highly sensitive person, or being a multi-potentialite, or however it is you want to identify. Wow, that's just, I don't know. It gave me goosebumps.
No,
right?
Good.
Yeah, that's just such a neat thing, especially since I just feel like I've gone a good majority of my life feeling like I needed to explain, or needed to hide it, or being ashamed. And yeah.
It's definitely a shift in perspective, and it's a little bit, I think, tender when you're, I don't know, I think you probably have already sort of, kind of happily taken on your multi-potentialed self.
Yes.
And I think people who are first encountering this idea, it's a very tender moment, because you're essentially telling them, well, you're exactly who you are, and that's good. And it's not just that you're okay, but it's you're needed. Who you are is needed in order to create, a whole mature culture. And so for me, that is one of the most, it's almost a sacred moment to be able to, to sit with someone and to have them begin to process that information and begin to internalize the message that, they're not just okay, but they're necessary, they're essential. And for someone who's had the exact opposite message for most of their life, that is so beautiful. And so, but it's also very tender. So I usually encourage everybody, okay, just, we're going to be with this idea for a while, and it's okay if it doesn't take immediately. It's okay if you kind of flash back and forth between this is nuts and this is okay. Sure. For a period of time until, it begins to settle. But just, we'll just keep reinforcing this message and showing you how, essential you are. And then it begins to become a reality.
And what a gift that you have to be able to give that to people who probably have never heard that before.
True. Many of them haven't. I think that's one of the most heartbreaking things, is so many of the people who I talk to feel so outside. They're outsiders at work. They're outsiders in their family. They're just outsiders in their communities. And to suddenly discover that there's a way to become part of something and to discover a sense of belonging based on who you are. That is, that's an essential thing for every human being to have. So, the fact that this information, I've integrated it and, and I'm able to talk to people about it, that is, I'm deeply honored.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we are deeply honored to have you be able to do that for us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Yeah. Gosh. Yes. Something that when, as we've been talking, and I've wondered, just during our conversation, I'm just curious, do you feel that becoming this age, like becoming in this midlife transition, enables us to maybe start exploring this and be open to accepting this more than, say, when we're 25 or when we were personally 25?
When we were personally 25.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a couple of things in play. In the first place, I know that since, I've hit my late 40s and 50s, I certainly have cared a bit less what people thought of me. So
yes.
I'm a little, I'm certainly a little more rebellious. And, matter of fact about this is me deal with it, in
right.
not in a harsh sense, but just kind of, I'm here and this is who I am. And, I'm sorry, I'm 55 and I've been living this way for a while, so I'm not going to change for anybody.
Right. Right.
So I think from that perspective, it does, people are the ground is sort of a little more ready, for that seed of an idea that, of who we are. But I also think that, when you look at how people who are 20 right now perceive themselves, there is less of that messaging about you have to pick one thing and do it. They're far more comfortable in this multi-potentialed field of existence, and they're far more comfortable with a very nomadic or flexible, nimble way of responding to life, to where they live, to the work they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I think, in a sense, some of the deepest wounding or baggage around being multipotential or being highly sensitive or even being an introvert is really carried in generations that are probably from about 35 or 40, up.
Right.
But yes, I think midlife certainly just gives us the perspective to be able to start diving into these ideas. Mm-hmm.
And I agree on all counts of that, because I know, and maybe this is why, but I feel that my experience as being a multi-passionate person has enabled me to talk to my sons as they were feeling the stress of having to decide, what they wanted to go to college for even. I feel like our school systems are kind of built around that. Like they're just basically grooming you to go to college and make these decisions at very young. Even at 6th grade, they had to decide which track they wanted to do. And how crazy is that? And so to be able to have this conversation, though, with them, and now that they are getting out on their own, and just say, look, I am not doing what I got my degree in. I got my degree, I tried it for a while, and then it was time to try something else. And trying to kind of give them that permission to just be open to letting life happen and follow their interests. And there is a way to do that and be responsible, I feel. I feel like that's part of the negative language that goes around it being flaky, jumping from one thing to another. And there is a way that you can do that and still be, quote, responsible around it.
I think there totally is. And, I have not read the whole book, but there's a book out right now by, her name's Jenny Blake, and the book's called Pivot. And the reason I mention it is because when I was reading her description, she calls the people she's talking about influencers. But when I read her description, I'm like, oh, these people are multi-potentialed.
Right.
And probably slightly highly sensitive. But in it, she's describing how to structure your career path so that you are open to new possibilities, but you're doing it responsibly, so that you're building a financial base, so that you're, always working where you are, but looking to create the next window. What's the next possibility? What's the next project you can engage that allows you to move, in ways that work for you. And that ways that also benefit, the companies you're working for, or your own company, again, if you're an entrepreneur.
Right. Well, I'll definitely have all the links to these books we've talked about in the show notes for this show, because there are definitely some good resources out there.
Yeah, there certainly are. And I think hers was the reason I wanted to mention it was because of what you were talking about with your sons. I think that it really addresses the stance, which is new, of being open and being fluid in your, in the decision making that you're doing.
Right, and I'd like to think that you and I are raising our kids to be okay. Like we are part of this movement that's allowing our children to be okay with being fluid and being open to learning new things and exploring, what their passions are. And so I would like to think that we are, that we're part of this change for our children.
I certainly hope so.
Right. Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
And I mean, if nothing else, we've certainly modeled it for them. Children learn through observation almost more than they learn through talking. So
they sure do, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is not always a good thing, but
exactly. They've seen us they've seen us live these sort of less conventional or more fluid, career paths, and it's it's something that they've internalized and they'll use in their own way, I imagine.
Right. Well, one thing that I wanted to say when I was looking at your website, Tracie, is I noticed a really strong connection that you have with nature and Mother Earth, and I don't know. I was just really drawn to that. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, when I mentioned one of the earlier iterations of my business, I talked about the fact that I did resiliency skill building or practices with people who had experienced trauma. And one of the things that has been present for me, and this is literally since I was too young, beyond memory almost, is the sense that I am, I'm connected to nature, and it's a very felt sense. It's something that's difficult to put words to. It kind of lives in my body more than it lives in, in my brain. And I can remember being a little girl and being out in the backyard and laying on my belly and feeling like there was this flow of connection, sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but almost roots from my body into the earth. And, and she's reaching back, and there was just this sense of connection and belonging has always been very present for me when I was, deeply in contact with nature. And so in my later life, and there were certainly times when I have experienced pretty significant trauma. So when recovering from that, one of the things that I rediscovered was this connection with the earth. And I began to use it more consciously, or I shouldn't say use it, engage with it more consciously. So I would, sit down on the earth or stand on the earth as I was meditating, or, simply breathing to try and recenter myself, and consciously become aware of the solid presence of the ground underneath of me, and the fact that if I stood with my back up against a tree, I would feel very grounded and centered and strong. And so in times when when you've been through trauma, or when you're recovering from a crisis, or even when life just goes sort of sideways on you, that sense of sort of spinning out of control, or kind of being in reaction to everything, that can lead to bad decision making for almost anyone. So I would imagine myself with that sensation of being back against a large tree, feet planted on the ground, and almost immediately my nervous system and I still do this, comes back into center, and I kind of take a deep breath, and I can feel, all right, I'm here, I'm centered, I am stable, and I'm kind of the quiet place in the center of this maelstrom, of whatever storm is going on around me. From there, I can make clear choices, and I can be resilient and I can care for myself, but I can also, make a response as opposed to just reacting. And so it's something that feeds me on just an incredible number of levels. Spiritually, it feeds me. Physically, emotionally, it's just the sense of belonging that I get. And again, because I was multi-potential, highly sensitive, introverted, and very intuitive. All of those things made up for me being a kid through my whole life. So I was constantly feeling outside, and that I never belonged anywhere. When I was coming into this relationship with nature. My sense of long-term. And so I found that's a theme that runs through all of the work that I have done. What I was doing with people, we were connecting, to the ground on tables so that they could stay in their bodies. Because again, my massage clients are often people who had survived violence or trauma. And so, from that point, we were working with a connection with nature all the way through the coaching that I've done. And even now, when I'm working with someone talking about career, we still talk about how do you center yourself? How do you build resiliency in the circumstances that you're living in? And oftentimes, we will talk about how nature can play a role in that, or how our relationship with the natural world plays a role in that. Because, we are nature. We're not.
Right.
People often say, go out and be in nature as if it's like another room in the house you can go into. But, we forget that we are an integral part of this ecosystem, that we're living in. And when we remember that and experience it as almost as a felt sense, it becomes a way to build resilience into our days and into our responses.
Mm. Oh, that was so beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. Tracie, what is it exactly, like, who are your clients? Who is someone that you just love to work with?
So the other day, I had someone contact me. And I'll start by saying, it's usually women, and that's just that women tend to self-select into working with me, although certainly men who are awakening to their high sensitivity, I think, it's sort of a startling thing for men. There are fewer men who are highly sensitive, and when they are beginning to get that, they really need some support grounding it. The other day I had a woman contact me, and what she said was, this is a woman who's remarkably accomplished in her field, is on paper has sort of the perfect job, perfect situation, loves what she does, is really well respected, is very well compensated, and yet there's a sense that she really needs to stop, that it's beginning to sort of grind her down, that her joy is not in this anymore. And she doesn't know what direction to go because, again, she's got this sort of multi-potentialed approach to life. And she had worked with 2 other coaches, and the processes that they used didn't work. And she came out the other end thinking she was uncoachable. Mm. And my heart broke when I heard that. I'm like, oh my goodness, not at all.
Right.
So people who are feeling on the outside, who are feeling that something needs to change, they don't know what direction to go with it. They're concerned because the pushback that they're getting from their family or their community says, why would you consider leaving this? It's so perfect. Or they are having an experience where the methodologies used by sort of more traditional career coaches aren't working for them. And they're feeling, sadly, like they're uncoachable. And so it kind of... I tend in some cases to be sort of a last resort. People sort of stumble on me like, oh, you do this, and they'll read about the Renaissance soul or the highly sensitive person and go, oh, okay, now I get why why I'm not reacting the way that other people do, to the typical career coaching, and that's who finds their way to my door, really. And a lot of times it is midlife women who are, as you mentioned earlier, sort of discovering, there is something different. I'm tired of hiding it, and I really want to make this change, and I want to make the rest of my life count. Mm-hmm. Because with both multi-potential people and with highly sensitive people, there's a real deep drive to make substantive contributions to the world, right? To make the world a better place in some way. Mm-hmm. So if you've been working in a traditional career and you want to make a switch, there becomes this real drive to make that shift into something that is meaningful. And I mean, that could be anything, right? No judgment about what's meaningful, but there's a sense of, you have to discover what is meaningful to you, and then how do you turn that into a career move?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And that is, I've realized, like, those are the clients I want to work with, who want to make the world a better place. And I think
Mm,
that that is my way of being able to help with making that contribution, is
right.
to help them realize that they can, whatever it is. Whether, I know I talk to on the podcast, I talk to a lot of business owners, but maybe it's, I don't want to say just, but maybe it's making art, or
Mm,
maybe it's, um, and whatever that is, writing or art or
right.
singing, or, whatever that is, that
Mhm.
being able to offer that to the world, and to quit hiding that and putting that off, just knowing that they have that within them, is just, I love watching, just watching a client just blossom and bloom. And I'm sure you feel the same way. It's just, yeah, when they can just
Yes.
kind of own it and just realize that it's okay and you have permission, and it's time now to set that free. And
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of funny because I think someone asked me, well, why do you want to do this, and why career coaching? Because it's sort of a very niche kind of thing. And my response was, because people want to make a difference in the world, and I want to make a difference by helping them make a difference. So
right.
really, your exact motivation there, and and work is one of the ways that people will invest in making a difference.
Mhm.
So that was, I think, one of the things that I thought. Plus, we spend so much of our lives working, and the number of people who are burnt out and demoralized and suffering in their career lives. It's just, it just has to stop, because we're
Yeah.
losing so much. We lose so much creativity and innovation and possibility when we are not really, really nourishing
Mhm.
the people who work. It's sorry, little wordless there.
No. I can tell you're just super passionate about that, and I think it's great. I think
Yeah.
it's awesome. And we live in such a time that I think that people, um, so we kind of talked about this, like, so you and I are in this self-help, self-care world, right? But we're
Mhm.
also in this, um, entrepreneurial world,
Mhm.
where we see that we live in such a time that the potential is just limitless. I
Mhm.
mean, you're in Philadelphia, I'm in Texas. We're having a conversation that's going to be on a podcast that is listened to around the world. I have listeners in Sweden. I have listeners in the Philippines. I have listeners in Australia, right? So how crazy is that?
I
So
love
just,
it.
yeah, so just the fact, and I feel like people need, um, like a lot of people just don't realize the potential of the time that we live in, to support them to create this career that they can love, and they can do good in the world in maybe non-traditional ways that
Right.
we've been used to in the past.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's just, yeah, that's kind of one of my passions too. But but
I can hear it. It's wonderful.
yeah, when I have clients that are in Canada or Dubai or all these, these different places that I can connect with people, and it's just great. I feel like I kind of came of age in my 40s. And what a great thing. What a great
Right.
time to do that. So so yeah. Anyway, sorry. That was my little
No, that was wonderful.
I just love, actually, that we need to thank our mutual friend Lara for
Yes.
introducing us. So she definitely knew two multi-passionate HSPs who needed to connect. So thank you, Lara.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tracie, this has just been an awesome conversation, and I could go on, but um, I want you to be able to go on with your day as well. Where can people connect with you, and tell us a little bit where listeners can go and connect with you online?
I have a website, tracienichols.com, and my Tracie is spelled Tracie, just to be confusing. And that's one of the best places to find me. And I've restarted the newsletter, only sending it out every 2 weeks because, who needs overwhelm? And when I write the newsletters, there's sort of an ongoing conversation, themes and things that pop out as I'm talking with clients, new resources that I find, thoughts about being HSP or multi-potentialed. So the aim is to make it really helpful without being overwhelming because, who needs one more piece of loud yammer in your inbox? So that's one of the primary ways to be in touch. I do have a Facebook page, but I am woefully inadequate at keeping it up to date. So, I will be doing better, but that's another way that you can be in contact. It's Tracie Nichols.
Okay.
On Facebook. Well, so
yeah, and like I said, I will have all these links for you to connect with you, as well as the books we talked about on the show notes for this show. And I heard a little bit of maybe a should, like maybe you feel like you should be better at Facebook. And maybe that's not just your jam, and that's okay. So
well, thank you. And it's I think it's a bit about timing, but it also was for a little bit. It was a bit about whether or not there was something important to put there. So there's that. Am I important enough to speak out? Little gremlin popping its head up. So thanks for pointing that out.
Right.
We'll be having a talk.
There you go. And also Facebook. It's funny, and of course here I was going to let you go, and then here I'm going to go on. But Facebook is a loud place. Facebook is for an HSP. I'm sorry, but this time of year and with everything going on, HSPs have not, I don't feel, have really been hanging out on Facebook too much. So,
not too much. Yeah. So exactly, which is why I like the website that is, I deliberately made it sort of a quiet space. Useful, but quiet.
Yeah, now that you say that, it is. It's very lovely. Very, it is very much that. So, good job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Tracie, again, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I just so appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Liz. It's been an honor, and I've had such a good time talking with you.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Thanks for joining Liz for the Midlife Schmidlife podcast. Remember, some days are never on your calendar until you put them there. Until next time.